This is Amy Chan from CakeDecoratingSchool.com, and if you like cake decorating, you're in the right place. In this video, we're going to be showing you how to cut a wedding cake. If you've been asked to do this, you might be panicking, and hopefully this video will help you out. We've done over 1,000 weddings, and we've attended quite a few, and we do get asked to cut the cake a lot. It's a nice favor we can do for friends and family, and we're always happy to accomplish it. But since I already know how to do it, it's pretty easy for me. And if you've never done it before, it might seem like a daunting and stressful task. So we've got some helpful tips and suggestions, along with some instructional content on how to make those slices beautiful and get it done quickly. This video is broken down into chapters, so you can skip through the steps and just watch the ones you need. And in addition to that, we're showing you 3 different ways to slice wedding cakes. So quickly, we're going to review some of the materials and equipment you might want to have on hand if you're going to be cutting a wedding cake, especially if it's the first time you've ever done this. Some of this might be a little new to you. Now, you're going to need a knife, and typically the couple will use a knife set. And if it's a good one, like this is a nice little Lennox set, the blade has some nice weight to it, so you could actually use it to cut a cake. If it's kind of one of the cheaper ones, that blade might be a little flimsy, and you might want to raid the kitchen for one. So if you're at a venue, the kitchen is a great place to check for a nice knife if you don't have one on hand. You can see that one has a nice serrated blade at the end, so it's going to be great for cutting a lot of types of cake. And they typically come with what most people think of as a pie server. So it's got that nice flat wedge with the slight angle there. And it's basically a fancy version of a palette knife. It's going to be great for getting underneath the tiers, or even in some cases slices if you're having difficulty, and helping you lift things up. The more professional, less fancy looking versions of this, a nice chef's knife will have a nice flat blade on it. In this portion, nice and wide. It's going to be helpful for supporting slices. It's got a nice length to it generally and a nice sharp edge, and that's really all you need. So if you don't have the cake cutting set on hand, or the one they've got is a little flimsy and you think it might not get the job done, try looking in the kitchen at the venue. So whether that's an actual wedding venue, a fire hall, community center, or whatever, a lot of times there'll be at least one solid knife on hand there. If that's not a go, try with the caterer. They might have an extra knife that you can borrow. And then the other thing that's going to be great is a nice large palette knife. This is going to help you when you're trying to lift tiers and move them off the cake and onto a nice steady surface so that they're easier to cut. It's also going to help you with moving pieces of cake if you need it. So a nice large one of these is always going to be a plus. And that's also a good one to check the kitchen or check with your caterer if you don't have a nice little pie server. Sometimes though, also if they don't have one of these, they might have just a regular pie server in there. That's a good thing to have on hand along with a knife to help you lift stuff. While you're cutting, you're gonna need something to help clean up your knife. I've got a clean microfiber cloth that I've gotten damp, so it's just a little moist to help clean off that blade in between. And if you're in the kitchen, obviously you can stop and rinse and wash your knife, but that's not always possible. Sometimes cakes need to be cut in place at the buffet. So have something damp ready to go that you can help clean your blade off, and that'll help you ensure that you get better looking slices, because if the knife starts to get gunked up, things can start to get a little bit messy. The other thing I like to have on hand is a nice healthy stack of clean paper towels or disposable napkins. If the event venue doesn't have any paper towels for you to grab, think if there's an extra stack of napkins, disposable ones with the caterer, or my go-to fail-safe is always the cocktail napkins. There's typically a healthy stack of plain cocktail napkins. Obviously, don't grab the nice monogrammed hot-pressed ones with the couple's little special logo on them, but usually there's a whole bunch of plain ones on hand at most venues or for most events. So grabbing a nice stack of cocktail napkins so you have something to help you wipe down that blade, keep it clean, tidy up your work surface is going to be a plus. Plates. Now, it doesn't matter what they are, whether they're nice china ones or like these are disposable plastic. There's a lot of options out there, say paper plates, disposable bamboo, whatever. Make sure you've got the stack of plates that's meant for serving the cake, right? So sometimes there'll be more stuff going on in events. There might be other desserts and stuff like that. So just make sure you touch base with the caterer or whoever else. If the plates aren't already out where you're going to be cutting the cake, make sure you've got a hold of those because you need some place to put those slices. And on another note, I would say grab an extra person to help you with those plates. One thing I found when I'm cutting cakes at events, especially if you want it to go fast because you want to get cake out to people, you want people to line up for it so they don't go back to the dance floor, have another cocktail, and forget it's even there and actually eat it, is having someone to help you just by passing the plate to you so you can drop a slice on it quickly and it can get set up on the buffet, put on a tray, or passed out. It's a great plus. Honestly, I like to have one person cutting the cake and two people handling plates and passing out slices, and I think that makes it go nice and smooth. So if you can enlist a little extra help along with finding those plates, that's always going to be a plus and make your life easier. Pliers. So anytime I'm going to be cutting a cake, I always keep a nice set of little pliers on hand. These ones are little wire cutter pliers that I got as part of a little kind of like jewelry making kit. I actually use them exclusively for cake, so they get washed and sanitized along with everything else, but they're really great for pulling out supports so that I don't actually have to dig my hands into the cake. So you'll see me use these later. They're not essential, but having something of this nature is a plus. Something that'll help you remove supports, remove decorations, and really get a nice firm hold on them so you can pull them out easily and freely without messing up the cake. Gloves. And this one is really a must if you're doing cake. So you want to make sure that you're handling everything safely, you're not touching other people's food. So any type of food service gloves, these are just some nice little black ones. They're kind of like the sandwich style making ones where they're just a little bit looser, but they could be latex, nitrile, whatever you need. Make sure you have some well-fitting gloves and you've got a nice supply of them. You'll notice I've got the whole box with me. I'll probably change them out a couple of times in the process of cutting a wedding cake because they'll start to get messy. And especially if you're dealing with, say, multiple flavors of cake, I'll typically change my gloves in between flavors. So if I cut one tier that's lemon, I'm gonna take off those gloves to cut the next tier that's, say, chocolate or maybe raspberry. That'll keep the cross-contamination down between flavors down, which is always nice, and also keeps those slices looking pretty. The extra bag of buttercream. Now this is one that may or may not come with a wedding cake order. If it does, great. Make sure you grab a hold of it. It'll probably be in the kitchen at the venue or possibly with the caterer and may not be right next to the cake. But if you have to do something like save the top of the cake, or maybe there's some little things that you need to stick on or reapply or whatever, it's always great to have just a little bit of extra buttercream on hand. So if this is hanging around, make sure you grab a hold of it and get it near your station before you start working. Extra cake boards. Now I'm going to use these for a few things. One, some larger ones can help provide a surface to place tiers on or equipment or slices, especially if you're working on the buffet line and you don't want to get the tablecloth super dirty. It can make a nice little landing spot for some dirty utensils or for a smaller tier of cake in order to cut it and have a nice firm surface to cut it on if you don't want to work through the whole cake top to bottom, or if you don't think the cake is sturdy enough. I also use these as guides when I'm doing a concentric circle style cut, which we'll touch on more later, but they basically make nice little set rounds that I can use to cut concentric circles in my cake, so then I can cut a lot more slices out of it. So these come in handy with larger tiers as well as smaller ones. Cake boxes. So cake boxes are great not just for extra slices or extra cake to pack it up for the couple or maybe the people who threw the event to take home, but also for saving the top tier. If they're saving the top tier, you want to make sure the first thing you do is find the box that it's going to go in, set it up, and hopefully there should also be a cake board. And you want to get that set up, ready to go. You can see I've got kind of 3/4 of the way folded. The back is up, the front flap is down. That's gonna make it easy to slide that top tier in. You can fold the front flaps up and lock them into place and then close the top and wrap it. Also, having any extra cake boxes to box up any extras or leftovers at the end is a great idea. So if those are in the kitchen or with the caterer, you want to locate those and have them kind of on hand for yourself before you start going. That way at the end, cleanup is also easy and you're not rushing around trying to find things in the middle of an event or potentially kind of jockeying for space or trying to get through a line of people that have now lined up for cake. So having those on hand is a great thing. So 2 things you might not think of that are always key is some tape. I like masking tape and a Sharpie. These are great for closing up boxes and labeling them. And I always kind of keep these on hand. If that's something you don't have, maybe check with the caterer. Typically, caterers will have these things on hand because they're labeling leftovers and their own dishes, etc., with them as well. So a lot of times they'll have Sharpies and they'll have some form of tape, even if it's not masking tape, and that'll help you with closing and labeling boxes before you say put them in the fridge if you've got leftover slices or that top tier of cake that you're taking care of. And finally, some saran wrap or food service film. This is a nice big kind of professional grade one, so it's a little larger than some of the smaller ones you might get at the grocery store, but picking up a little thing of saran wrap before you head over to the venue can be a really great thing. It'll allow you to wrap up boxes and, well, just, you know, it's great to have on hand if you're going to be saving some leftovers. If you don't have any, you can check with your venue or check with your caterer. Those are going to be the 2 things that are always going to be a great source for a lot of these things because they're typically going to have them on hand for doing events in general. And so you'll probably find some in the kitchen at the venue, and if not, always check with the caterer. But this is going to be great for wrapping up any leftovers or making sure that the top tier of that cake stays really nice and fresh. So we're going to show you how we would normally save the top tier. We're actually going to end up cutting the top tier because no one's going to be eating this and no one's going to be saving it for an anniversary. But for the sake of your sanity, in case you do need to save the top tier, we're now going to show you how. So our goal is to get this little top guy off of there and into the box. So you notice I've got the box already set up ready to go. I've got the board there. If you need to, pull it forward out of the box to make a nice clear landing space for you if it makes you nervous to go in there. It's easy enough to slide that in there. I've got my extra bag of buttercream that I'm going to use, and I'm just going to give myself a nice little squeeze of soft buttercream on there, and that's going to help that top tier stick in place on there and keep it from sliding around in the box on you or on the couple. Now, if you don't have that bag, one thing to do is maybe peel off a decoration, take some buttercream from the back, stick it on there, or as we start moving things, you can always scrape a little from underneath the top tier, or hopefully the tier has some coming with it. But you want to make sure that you've used something to stick that cake to the board to keep it from sliding around in the box, because that's essentially the enemy, right? We want to make sure we've got our gloves on. You'll notice I've got my towels, both my damp microfiber towel and my clean paper towels right next to me, along with my knife and my spatula, and I'm kind of ready to go. I've also got some tape and my Sharpie ready so I can label things. And the first thing I want to do to approach this is actually kind of rotate the cake for your sake. If you're working, just kind of see, if you can, a lot of times cakes are on a round table or they're on a small rectangle, kind of go from the back, right? Because I don't want to interfere with the decorations. I want to give myself a nice clear shot to get underneath that. So kind of check out the cake and see where you can go in and see where it's going to be easy to get in underneath there. Free that top tier from the bottom too and lift it off. And to do that, we're going to use our spatula. So we're going to use this nice thin blade of the spatula just to go in underneath. So you can see I can just kind of press against the top layer, just kind of work until you can kind of feel the cake board and feel yourself getting underneath there. So ideally there's a board underneath the cake, securing it, giving it support, And you should feel those supports, and you should be able to feel when it kind of clicks loose for you and frees itself, but use some nice steady motions just to kind of get in there. You see a dig in and then move to the side, and then I can feel it free. Like it just released itself. The little bit of buttercream that was between the board and the top of the cake has kind of popped apart, and I can move that now. So that's going to be a good indication that I can lift this up without damaging it. And I'm going to try and do that and get those decorations all in place and move it down here. So we have our top tier on our cake board. It's secure, which is nice. It's got that little bit of buttercream underneath. Some of our decorations, though, are going to eclipse the top of our box. So I want to take and just kind of gently remove those if you can. And I had one that fell off, so I can just kind of quickly replace that and kind of put it on there. And now we're going to be good. We can slide into our box. So I just think it's nice little motion here. Whoop. And we're in our box and we're ready to wrap up. So we've got our cake slid into our box, and ideally the cake would be shorter than the sides of the box, but we wanted to show you what happens if it's not, because that's going to be more of a problem. So if you got some headroom in here, you can just close this box up like normal, lid nice and flat. If you don't, we're going to show you what to do. So these two little tabs, they kind of click in right here. You can see they lock into place and secure, and now we've got the front closed. We want to secure the top. So you're going to take those outside flaps and just kind of secure them down without closing it all the way, and tape them open. That way you got a little window right in there. And this is a little bit more of a thing when it comes to the taller, more modern style cakes, where they tend to be a little taller than normal, and so standard cake boxes might not quite fit them, and I just want to give a little bit of tape to that opening to help keep it closed. But you can see now we're not smushing the top of the cake. Ooh, you can see it's just hiding in there, and you can actually see what it is too, so hopefully no one steals the cake top and no one sets anything on top of it, which is great. I also always keep a Sharpie on hand, and I like to label these boxes. Almost like shame labeling, because sometimes people will steal the box and try and wrap up leftovers with it, leaving the bride and groom nothing to take their cake home. So I always label it cake topper. And then I write something like give to bride and groom after wedding, and I'll write it on the front, sometimes on the sides too, like cake, do not smash. Write nice and big. It'll help ensure that hopefully it gets home with the bride and groom, with the cake actually intact and not smushed, and no one's walked off with it. So the other thing we want to have on hand is our saran wrap. And you want to think about this like you're sealing it up kind of for posterity. So you want to go nice and heavy with this. So think about it kind of like wrapping a diaper on a baby. We want to go with a nice big piece laid out, set the box on top of it, and then wrap it up from both ends and make sure that they kind of touch each other and join together. You can pull your box off to the side, do another one, and go the other direction. So we went kind of back to front there, and now we're going to go across the sides, and that'll seal up the openings that we have on the sides. If your box is bigger than your saran wrap, do a couple of passes. Do one half and then the other, and then go the other direction and do the same thing. And this should seal it up nicely for them to get it home. And from my end, I typically recommend that people eat the cake topper the next day, or say for like a brunch if they're having it the following day, or maybe for, a little private moment for themselves. I don't always recommend saving it for the 1-year anniversary. That usually results in some less than stellar cake experience. And I typically only tell brides and grooms to do that if they're really, um, looking for a giggle on their anniversary while they're eating some less than quality cake. So just keep in mind that, you might want to wrap this up so they can take it home, but maybe encourage them to eat it a little earlier than that first anniversary if they're popping it in the freezer. We've got our top tier back out of the box because we're not actually saving it. We're going to cut it. And we're going to talk about it as if the cake is still together a little bit. So if you're not saving the top, you can leave that in place. If you are, you can take it off, put it in the box. It can go away in the fridge in the venue and just kind of hang out there till the end of the event. But for our sake, cake as a whole, you want to remove decorations that are not edible. So for us, we've got some little rice paper sails on here, and they're going to be easy to just pull right off, and they can go in the trash. They're rice paper, but they're actually pretty firm, and they're going to be unpleasant to eat, and they don't have a lot of flavor, so there's really no added value to leaving them on. In addition to that, you might have some decorations that have things like wires or supports in them. So if you have things like gum paste flowers, you really want to pull those off. They often are wired. So the wires help keep the petals together. They're also potentially have some structure, like maybe a floral tape wrapped wire that's inserted into the cake that's part of the flower. So when you pull those out, it can be helpful to have those pliers. And you just want to start gently removing all that stuff from the outside of the cake that's not edible and not going to be served. And you want to make sure that you're getting any supports out. That's going to be really important so we're not serving non-edible objects to our guests. The other thing we're going to do as we're getting ready to cut cake, as we're disassembling it, is remove the supports. So now we already removed the top tier to kind of pantomime saving the top. But once we did that, you can see we've exposed some of this top surface of the cake underneath, and you can see some of these supports. Now I'm using small dowel rods or kind of like those bamboo barbecue skewers. That's typically my support of choice. But you might find a variety of things down in there. Some people are actually going to use thick, fat, maybe 1/4 or 1/2 inch dowel rods, especially if it's a large cake, because those need more support. Sometimes people use things like drinking straws or bubble tea straws. They might be cake pop sticks, so they might actually be white and blend in. So you want to make sure you're really looking for them. And typically, most people are going to go about 1 inch to 1.5 inches apart with supports. So you'll notice I might not see them, but I know there's going to be some in a ring around here. And the bigger the cakes are, the more rings of support they're going to need. So you want to make sure that you're really kind of feeling down in there, checking for them. If you need to, use your finger a little bit. That's why gloves are important. We don't want to be really, manhandling people's slices of cake, but make sure you're getting down there. And because I'm using these barbecue skewers for supports, it's easy to just really feel them, the top of them with my finger as I go, even if they're still covered up. So it's important, you want to remove all of those before you start cutting pieces of cake, before you start passing them out. There's nothing like someone getting what is essentially the equivalent of a large toothpick in with their serving of cake. And I think, yep, one more right there. So sometimes it can take a little bit of work to feel around for those. You can always use your offset spatula or that cake server too to kind of help like shave a little buttercream off the top if you need to expose those tops. I knew how many were in there, so I know that I've gotten them all out. If your cake maker has been helpful, it's potentially possible that they've written on the order how many are in each tier, and that'll give you a good guide. Did I pull them all out? And the other thing I always like to have on hand when I'm cutting a cake is a trash can. Make sure there's one right next to you. Makes it easy just to dump all those things in the can and get them out of the way. But then this tier is going to be ready to remove. pull off to the side and cut for us. So make sure, one, you strip the cake of any non-edible decorations, especially anything that have wires or other supports in them, and that you're removing the supports from the tiers as you go to make sure that you're getting any and all non-edible objects out of the cake. Wedding cakes take support to maintain their structure. So if that wedding cake is still looking nice by the time you're going to cut it, there's definitely some supports in there, and those are going to need to be removed before you cut your pieces. We're getting ready to cut our first tier. I've got my small topper. This is a 4-inch, and this is a style of slices that I would use for 6-inch round cakes and smaller. Any bigger than that, and your slices are gonna get too big, too deep, and too unwieldy. And basically, this is just a smaller, more petite version of a traditional slice, what you might associate with a birthday cake. And so to just mark it quickly, because we're gonna be doing this kind of right on the fly, I'm just going to make a little indent with my knife quickly in half, and then rotate it, go in half again. That's going to give you quarters. And then it's going to be easy to divide these into slices. Now we can go even smaller and do quarters again if you want to get 16 out of here, but my goal is really only to get 12 pieces out of this top. And the thing you want to think about with wedding cakes is these portions are going to be smaller than regular slices of cake. So you don't want to make huge pieces. Our goal is just to make a nice little kind of like portion of cake that's great. It gives people a taste, but it's not too big. Typically, wedding cake is served after a huge meal and kind of like a day of eating. People have had appetizers, maybe a multi-course meal, and there's potentially other desserts going on. So typically, we're going with something like maybe it's a 3 to 4 inch height. This one is actually closer to 6. And we want to be 1 inch to 3/4 of an inch. So the taller the cake, the slimmer it can be, and anywhere from 2 to 3 inches in depth. So it's not a huge portion. So I've got my first one here. I'm just gonna slide my knife underneath, and that first, there we go. First portion of cake is always gonna be a little bit crazy, a little bit messy, but we can see we get a nice little slice of cake. And I've got my plates right next to me so we can dump it right on there. And you can see I've got a nice little slim wedge that I've cut out of that cake. We got our first slice out, which is always the most difficult. You've got that little cake board underneath there that you're gonna need to kind of slide the tip of the knife on top of, so it can be a little tricky to find on the first one, but once you know where it is, it's actually pretty easy. And for your second slice and beyond, it's gonna be even easier because you can literally get your fingers in there right next to the slice. So think nice, firm downward pressure, get your knife in position, and just slide down on that cake, and it should cut through nice and easy. And then just put your hand right next to it, and that's gonna give you the perfect serving utensil, your hand. You can use this then to flip those pieces over onto your plates. So we're just gonna keep cutting, and we'll make quick work of this top tier. I'm only cutting this into 12 slices, but honestly, with the size of the height on these, you could easily do 16. So for the 6-inch round tier of this cake, we're gonna do something a little different. Our first one, we cut those kind of traditional wedge shapes, but that really only works for petite cakes because you're giving yourself actual real slices. This one is what I call kind of the quick rectangle. I don't know if it really has a name, but basically I'm going to kind of shave off the sides and make almost like a rectangular shape to this cake. And I'm going to use that to cut some really, really quick slices. This one results in usually slightly bigger, more oddly shaped slices, but it's really fast. So it's a great way to cut a lot of cake quickly, but it's not the most efficient use of cake. So this is a good one if you say have a large event where you've got a lot of buffer in the cake and you want to get it cut and served quickly. If you're thinking you don't have tons of extra, it's not the best one. So I'm going to start by going about 1 to 1.5 inches in and just marking a nice little line there. And I'm going to do that on both sides. And I'm just going to cut down and then cut that portion in half. So just kind of halfway over. And you can see these little cuts, quick, it results in pretty irregular slices that are going to give you kind of a lot of frosting. But it's a great way to kind of square off this tier and then make that center portion nice and easy to portion out. So I'm going to do the same thing with 2 sides of the cake and remove those slices, which are frankly great for people who love a lot of frosting. So if you have sugarholics, those slices are definitely for them. And you can see this results in a cake that has kind of a weird shape to it, but now is going to be great for quickly making some slices. So if I divide this kind of in half, make a little mark, and then do some quick thirds. So think always easier to divide something in half and then make smaller divisions. That means I'm getting 6 pieces across, and now I can do roughly thirds on those too. So just kind of mark the top quickly, and this is going to give me quickly 18 nice petite portions of cake. So I'm just going to go about halfway through because I want it to remain pretty stable with those slices on one side. And now I can quickly follow the lines I've made for myself on top and knock out a bunch of slices for guests. So you can see these are giving me really nice little slices from the inside. Those outside edges are going to be some irregular shaped pieces, but these are really going to, be nice. They'll be relatively even, but slightly kind of irregular. So after I get half of the cake done, I'll go back and do the other half. And I do like that while they're not perfect in terms of the look, this kind of gives you some pieces, some with more frosting, some with less, some that have kind of like irregular shapes to them, and that they're a little more petite than others. And that's actually kind of nice for parties because you always have someone who wants a little bit of cake but doesn't want too big of a piece. And I hit the middle sometimes. I hit the little bit of frosting that's down there at the bottom that's keeping everything in place. And you just want to make sure you get that free. And you can see the gloved hands come in really handy for cutting because it's a nice place for your slices to land. And you can see this makes really quick work of the cake. So if you have someone holding out plates for you, that's really a nice thing because it'll really help to speed things up. So I'm just going to go through, cut my little thirds on that second half, and make quick work of those slices as well. We're down to our final tier, and we're gonna get the most pieces out of this one, and we're also going to do the most difficult kind of cut, I feel. It's one where we're doing concentric circles, and the bigger the cake is, the more concentric circles you're gonna have to do. So I always keep cake boards on hand. This one's an 8-inch tier. I want a 2-inch depth on my slices, so I'm gonna put a 4-inch cake board in the middle. Now, if you don't have any cake boards, you can always go to the craft store, pick up some, and if you don't have the right sizes, you can always cut them in advance so it's a little easier for you. But what we're gonna do basically is we're gonna use this as a guide. We're going to get it kind of so it's approximately in the middle, doesn't have to be exact. So think you want about the same width here, there, and just give yourself a visual. Take a second to kind of measure if you have any kind of tool, even your knife, where you can just kind of visually give yourself a nice little check. And we're going to sink the knife down in and just use a gentle sawing motion. And this is gonna take a little bit of time too, but it's the only way to really get enough slices out of a big cake, because we have to kind of make little divisions so that we can cut slices out of that outside ring and then cut some wedges out of the inside ring. And you can see it wants to kind of pull up some cake with it because it's being difficult today. But we're gonna go all the way around. If you need to, rotate, right? It's always good to work close to you. So if you need to, rotate things and keep working. And this especially is where having things like some extra paper towels, a damp cloth can come in handy. I'm just gonna keep sinking it down in there, kind of like I'm stabbing the cake until I get all the way around back to the beginning, and I've essentially made myself a giant circle. And I might need to go and kind of clean up that cut a little bit as I work, but I can then kind of discard my little template, get any kind of extra little rolls of frosting, and I'm gonna start a bit like I did with my first top tier, where I'm gonna go with my knife, kind of mark half, turn, and go half again. And this is going to give me some nice little markings where I can then divide those a little bit as well. Now, since I have a cut, I'm essentially just cutting to right here, so to that line that's obviously a little messy, to make my pieces. So I want to make some nice, tall, slim pieces, and I can probably get 4 out of each of these outside sections. And so I'm only going to be cutting to the line here. So let's get myself oriented. And if you're cutting big pieces, I've got one hand on the actual handle of my knife, and the other one, I'm just using some nice, gentle pressure on the top of the blade, kind of near the handle, just to help get nice controlled slices down in there. And you'll feel where the cake board is at the bottom. So just want to get in underneath there, go to the back, and you'll know whether you got a good cut on that or not. If it comes out freely, if it doesn't, just take that knife and sink it right in there in the back, and that should free things if you didn't get a good cut. So you can kind of do that for each section, but this is going to pull out, if it behaves, a nice little piece for us. You can see from there. And I lost a little chunk of frosting, but that's okay. So I'm gonna keep going, and you can see each of those outside sections I can get 4 pieces from. Once I'm done with the outside ring, I'll cut the inside ring just like I did the top of the cake, so those traditional wedges. So we're just gonna keep going and layering up our slices. And you can see my knife is getting much messier for this. It's a much more complicated cut. So make sure you have that damp towel on hand so you can clean it off as you need to. And that should make for better, cleaner cuts as you go. I feel like a lot of times with cake and pie, the first slice is always the messiest, and then they get better and easier from there. So they don't have to be perfect, but you can see then we're starting to work, and we're gonna go in a whole ring around the outside of the cake. So I'm just gonna keep working on this, but you can see this method is gonna give us a lot of slices. They won't be too deep, they won't be too big, and they won't be too unmanageable. And just mark your outside edge if you need to. And at any point, if you need to, also sink your knife down in the back just to free up the back edge of these slices if they're not coming clean, if you didn't get a good enough cut with your knife when you were going around in a circle, which sometimes isn't apparent until you get to this stage. You can see once we cut the entire outside ring, we have basically a small cake in the middle, and we can just cut it like we did that first tier. So just nice little cuts. I've already kind of marked the center when I marked for the outside edge of the cake. So just start with a nice little slice, get underneath there, and pull out a nice little wedge. And we'll just keep going until we finish cutting the inside of this cake. And as you can see, these slices have less frosting. So the outside ones will be frosting heavy, and these will be a little less on the frosting, but in general, wedding cakes typically have a bit of filling to them, so that's not really a big concern. There's generally enough, even when you're cutting slices like this, that come from the inside. But you can see this is a great way to get a lot of slices out of that 8-inch tier. We did 32 around the outside edge, and then we'll get another 12 from the inside. So that gives us like 44 pieces out of the bottom of the cake alone. So you can cut an 8-inch cake really to feed a lot of people. And once you get to this point, it is pretty quick work. So it's definitely helpful to have people handing you and passing you plates so you can get those slices on plates as quick as possible. And especially the last two, it's helpful just to get both of your hands in there. So as you can see here, we have our fully cut and sliced cake. We easily got 12 portions out of our small top 4-inch tier. You could even cut that into 16. We got 22 out of our 6-inch tier, where we did our kind of quick rectangle slices that kind of result in those uneven pieces from the edges and some uneven shapes from the sides. but it's a really quick way to cut the cake and very effective. So if you've got to cut cake for a large number of people, especially if you've got a good amount of buffer, and you think there'll be some people in the crowd that want more frosting or want a more petite portion, that can be a quick and easy method for cutting cake that really gets those pieces out quickly. It resulted in 22 portions from that 6-inch tier, which really, if we cut it with one of the more traditional methods, could even be more. It's a little easier to get some of those slimmer pieces when you're doing some of the wedges. And finally, the massive pile in the back is from our 8-inch tier, and that one gave us 44 pieces using that traditional concentric circle method. Now that's something I only recommend really with doing on tiers that are 8, 10, 12 inches or larger. And the larger you go, the more concentric circles you'll need. And it's really kind of one of the best ways to go with large cakes, especially if you really need to get some slim, even portions with a little more control. Total, we got 78 pieces out of our cake. So that small cake that you saw and probably think, how many people can that feed? It really does feed a lot. And these are really nice, actually pretty generous portions for wedding cake. It's really meant to have after a big meal. You've probably eaten apps and a multi-course meal, and there might actually be other desserts. So if you're cutting the cake, don't panic and think you need to give out really big portions. It's better to go with these kind of either party portions in terms of size or even smaller with that kind of traditional wedding cake portion where it's really just a taste of the cake, because people can come back then for maybe a second or third flavor, especially if there's multiple flavors of cake. Going with smaller portions can actually be a better thing because then people are more likely to indulge and not feel like they're overdoing it. So don't worry too much about cutting them too small. Cutting them too big is typically more of a problem when you might run out of cake and still have more people that want some. So if you've been tasked with cutting a wedding cake, probably the most important thing to figure out first is how many slices do you need to get out of that cake? And does that include the top or not? If they're saving the top, take that out first and don't include that in your math, and then figure out a little bit about how many portions you want to get out of each tier before you even start cutting. When you set up, make sure you have things like a trash can on hand, someone to help you handle plates. I always find it's good to have 2 people just passing you plates so you can just really cut and just put those slices on there quickly and really get them out quickly. One of the things about wedding cake is it tends to disappear into the kitchen and maybe reappear a half an hour later sometimes, and people have forgotten about it. They're back on the dance floor, they're having another drink. It just sits at their place. So especially if it's going out on a buffet, sometimes you'll be cutting it in place. People might start queuing up. Use any of these methods to get yourself kind of quickly started and going. And if you need to, take a little trip to the craft store first and make sure you have a little go bag of items that'll help you cut it easily, right? So if you've been tasked with cutting a wedding cake, bless you, and you're a really good friend or family member, and we really hope this video helps you accomplish your mission with ease and as little stress as possible. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like more about the cake decorating materials and equipment we use, or just some inspirational videos about cake decorating itself, you can follow us on Insta or YouTube at Cake Decorating School. If you'd like to know more about yearly membership and what it entails, you can go to www.cakedecoratingschool.com for more information. And if you're interested in these products, you can check the links in the description.